Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited today. We have World of Antiquity, which means we're going to talk about some old things. We're going to talk about some old stuff. This is the mysterious origin of the Sumerians, of course, one of the most famous civilizations of all time. So, yeah, let's jump right in.
For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. If you are interested in ancient history, you've probably heard of the Sumerians of Mesopotamia.
I have.
Although they are not the first people who lived in Mesopotamia, they are the earliest known ethnic group that inhabited the region. The Sumerians, along with the Egyptians, are known for being the earliest known people to develop a fully developed writing system. When I say fully developed,
that's Cuneiform.
I mean that the writing system could represent language in complete sentences. The Sumerians are also known for being the ones who built, beginning in the 4th millennium BCE, some of the earliest cities in the world, and who were the developers of the calendar and timekeeping systems.
So basically, so much educational advancement
that we commonly use today. When we use the word Sumerian, we are, of course, referring to people who lived in the land of Sumer and who created the distinctive culture that we call Sumerian. But we also are referencing people who spoke the language that we call Sumerian.
So it's kind of like there's like a governance, sphere, but then there's like a cultural sphere.
We learned of this language when the Cuneiform texts of southern Mesopotamia were deciphered. But a mystery that has befuddled scholars concerns the origins of the Sumerians.
Very interesting to learn. I default to they came from the steppe, most likely the Indo-Aryans. But let me learn something if it's not.
How long were they in Mesopotamia before writing and urban culture was developed? And if they came from somewhere else, where? Join me as we consider the puzzle of Sumerian origins.
Ooh.
The origin of the Sumerians has been the subject of very intensive debate that began more than a century ago. I suppose
not that long ago.
The first question we should ask is, what is the earliest evidence for the existence of the Sumerians in southern Mesopotamia? Well, this would be with the first appearance of texts that are written in Sumerian. And there is enough inscriptional evidence to suggest that even the earliest partly syllabographic texts of southern Mesopotamia, this is before cuneiform, were written in Sumerian. And we are probably safe going as far back as the logographic texts that led neatly into the syllabographic texts. This puts us at around 36 to 3500 BCE.
Okay, so older than, well, hold on. Yeah, okay.
But before then, we have no direct evidence bearing on this question. An approach taken by physical anthropologists in the 1920s and 30s was to look at human remains found in the region and see if they could identify those that were Sumerian. One early view was that the Sumerians had short, broad skulls, whereas the Semitic people in the region had long, narrow skulls.
Of course, that's too broad of an assumption. You have to have more empirical data.
The problem was that there was, and still is, a scarcity of well-preserved skulls to examine. And so, in order to bolster theories based on bones, iconographic evidence would be imported into their proposals. They would look for similar imagery in the art of neighboring people, compare it to their bones, and draw conclusions. But it soon became apparent that the iconographical representations were conventionalized throughout that part of the world, and so it couldn't really be linked up to the osteological data. Over time, as material evidence was gathered, it became clear that the population of Mesopotamia was a lot more complicated than what was thought.
That's sometimes fun because when it's not as simple as you thought, there's more to it. You get more info, you get more context, you get more substance.
And it made the search for a Sumerian race based on bones pointless. While connecting Sumerian culture with a race has been a dead end, a connection between Sumerian culture and Sumerian language is accepted by all.
Yeah, you just look for the tablets.
Language, after all, is cultural. But even historical linguistics, which traces the movement of people by reconstructing the family
Yeah, this thing is daunting, by the way.
trees of human language, and which sheds light on the geographic origins of many language speakers, cannot help us on this matter, because the Sumerian language has no known relatives. It's not Semitic,
That's interesting.
it's not Indo-European. Efforts have been made to connect it with modern languages, such as Turkish or Hungarian or Sino-Tibetan, but these have not been convincing because they often rely on naive comparisons of sounds and meaning without regard to grammar. A more serious attempt has been made to associate it with the Uralic language family, but that has not gained much traction, largely because of our limited knowledge of Sumerian phonology.
Say Uralic, is that geographically towards the Ural Mountains of Russia? That? Or is that totally different?
So, most scholars still consider it an isolated language. Now,
Which is weird because it's not on an island. Usually you get isolated languages on islands. So I wonder, like, the other cultures that are around Sumer and Samaria, for culture, the sphere of Samaria, where these dialects could have been picked up. See, because you might also have the mystery might be where it came from, right? But you might have words, Sumerian words that are stolen from the surrounding cultures, similar to how like we do that for any kind of culture and language today.
it's true that typologically, Sumerian shares some grammatical features in common with some other languages,
Okay, I could have waited 5 seconds.
such as Basque, Georgian, and an early language spoken in Siberia called Chukchi. But this doesn't really help us in determining Sumerian's parentage, because similar features occur independently all over the globe. Even the Sumerian name for their language doesn't help. They called it Emegir, which simply means native tongue. No one really knows where the Sumerian language came from, so this will not help us to determine how long the Sumerians had been in Mesopotamia by the time their experiments in writing began. Here are the archaeological periods under consideration. The earliest logographic texts date to the middle of the Uruk period,
The middle, okay, so like 4,250.
which is the time that saw the emergence of urbanism in Mesopotamia. So scholars are generally agreed that a date just prior to 3600 is the latest possible date for the arrival of the Sumerians in the area.
Oh, okay, that's what he means. Threw me off for a second because of that time frame.
Before the Uruk period, and partly overlapping it, was the Ubaid period, which is the period that the alluvial plain in southern Mesopotamia was first settled. Were the Sumerians there during the Ubaid period? Scholars are not in agreement over the most likely scenario. There are three chief hypotheses that have attracted support.
Well, do they become the Sumerians when they're literate, or are they Sumerians before they were literate? That is actually the real question, and I would say they are.
One is that the Sumerians were already in Mesopotamia since the beginning of the Ubaid period, and maybe even before, and that they are among those who first settled the alluvial plain. The evidence for this is mainly archaeological.
Has to be.
The archaeological record during the Ubaid and early Uruk periods does not indicate any cultural change that might indicate an influx of a new group into the area. The Ubaid material culture appears to seamlessly and smoothly develop gradually into the Uruk material culture. Temple architecture and forms of worship show continuity rather than a shift. A competing hypothesis is that the Sumerians had only recently arrived in Mesopotamia when their logographic texts began to be written.
But that don't make sense. Why would that's just like that's lazy. It feels like just because they advanced in one region of their sphere of technology, which is writing, why would that just make him appear rather than, I don't know, adoption would happen?
As evidence for this, scholars leaning towards this view appeal to the Sumerian language itself. There are words in the language that appear to be foreign language words that the Sumerians adopted. These words include the names of the Euphrates River, which they called Buranun, and the Tigris River, which they called Idiglat, and the names of several major settlements, including Eridu, Ur, Larsa, Isin, Lagash, Nippur, and Kish. This would suggest that these cities were founded before the Sumerians got there.
Okay. I don't know if I believe that assumption unless I had more context. Or are they just naming places?
And then the Sumerians just continued to use their original names. Also, some basic words for agriculture and agricultural tools, such as the words for plow, furrow, date, palm, farmer, and basic words for urban crafts, such as potter, metalworker, mason, carpenter, do not appear to be Sumerian words.
Well, what if those words actually predate Sumeria and we're talking about something completely older that we somehow don't have, and because archaeologically they don't exist?
So it seems as if the Sumerians moved into the area and learned these words from the people who were already using this.
I mean, that is a fair hypothesis now as I think about it, because of the. But I wonder if like a lot of these things came in conjunction, or they came from an older parent language, which they intersect with somehow.
Technology. Now, the argument that proponents of the first hypothesis give against this evidence is that our understanding of the growth and development of the Sumerian language before the time of writing is extremely limited, and we cannot say for certain these aren't Sumerian words. Those who posit a late arrival of the Sumerians do not agree on where the Sumerians came from. Some scholars suggest they came by sea from the Persian Gulf.
But where by sea? You know, that's the always say the Strait of Hormuz right there, into the Persian Gulf. Like where does that come from? Like, does that come from Africa? Does that come from India? Come from Arabia?
And originated somewhere to the south. Others suppose they came from the north, near the Caspian Sea. Yet others...
That's not a bad hypothesis, so my default, like I said, is kind of like a hook from like the steppe.
Say they came from the direction of Iran, to the east. But all these are just educated guesses.
Of course.
I found a strange research paper in the journal Advances in Anthropology, written by a retired physician, that argued that the Sumerians were so enamored of lapis lazuli that they must have come from somewhere that had an abundance of lapis lazuli.
Enamored. That's a word I don't know. And I gotta look up. And you guys are going to be just looking at me learning a word. Be filled a love for. Well, sometimes people, so they love it. Do they love it prior? Do they love it when they see it? You know, a lot of people could love something inherently, like he's suggesting they're enamored for, because they had it prior, or it might be something they never had, so they're like clinging to it, you know? So there's like a juxtaposition of that between those two feelings. So that's a dead end for me.
And he narrowed it down to Turkmenistan. This hypothesis hasn't gained any adherents that I know of.
Wow.
Probably because a society can easily fall in love with imported products. They don't need to have ever lived where the product was obtained.
There you go.
A shift in more recent times into looking at the interactions between various groups in the archaeological record has led to a third hypothesis.
Okay.
Which is that the Sumerians were an amalgamation of many groups who migrated into Mesopotamia during the Ubaid and especially the early Uruk period. Streams of immigrants coming from many directions and speaking different languages came to Mesopotamia over the course of several centuries, and they gradually adopted a common culture and produced a common language.
I don't hate it.
In other words, the Sumerians never existed outside of Mesopotamia, but they also didn't exist in Mesopotamia either until a certain point. This would explain why there are some words in Sumerian that appear foreign, and also why the material culture shows smooth and gradual development over time.
Maybe.
What about DNA? Can this shed any light on the subject? To date, not much work on this question has been done in genetics, but there was an interesting study done on the marsh Arabs. These are people who had lived for a very long time in the marshes of southern Iraq, right where the Sumerians had once lived. The question was, were the marsh Arabs descendants of the Sumerians, or were they a group that migrated into the area in later times? The genetic study indicated that the mtDNAs and Y chromosomes of the modern marsh Arabs are predominantly of ancient Middle Eastern origin, so they very well could be the descendants of the Sumerians.
Okay, that's interesting.
Moreover, these people had no significant ancient Indian or Southern Asian ancestry.
Okay, so we can... I didn't think that either. I was thinking like the steppe still. So I don't know. I don't think... Okay, so we narrowed down that.
This would indicate that the Sumerians did not come from South Asia.
No.
The marsh Arabs did possess certain cultural features associated with South Asia, such as water buffalo breeding and rice farming, which were most likely introduced from the Indian subcontinent. But as this only marginally affected their gene pool, the study concludes that they did not come from South Asia.
Okay.
It's early days here on the DNA evidence, so we will have to wait and see.
That's all we know.
Right now, there is really no way to tell how long the Sumerians were in Mesopotamia, or where they came from. It is a mystery that may never be solved. We shall see. If you enjoyed this video...
That's it, man. I don't know. What do you guys think? I still think they possibly came from the steppe, unless I'm ahead of myself and the steppe migration came later. If not, I don't know. I really don't know. And I guess we'll have to wait. Let me know if you have any other context or video suggestions on the Sumerians, guys. It shall be a mystery until next time. Peace out and bye-bye.